JD, what's going on, buddy? How are you?
I'm good, boys. How you doing?
Doing well. Feeling great. Buzzing. How excited are you for this one today?
Yeah, very. I'm a little, as you can see, I'm home, which is long story, but I wish I was in the building. We were there in Montreal. We had some logistical issues, and it's the stuff will bore your listeners, but it's harder for us to get up on television fast when we're not the rights holder in another building. It just takes us a while because we have to wait till the building clears out and such. So we decided to do it from studio, and this is the first big Canada USA game I've missed in person in a while, but I'm super pumped to watch it.
Rightfully so, Duff. Honestly, I feel like they set the table so well Saturday night in Montreal, and obviously the animosity and the build-up, the Tkachuk brothers, have been so much story. What's your read on this game tonight? Like, what's your feeling going into, where you sit with this Canada-USA rivalry?
Well, Carter, I mean, first of all, I'm the single worst predictor in the history of the world, so please take nothing into what I say. I feel Canada, and I just think the biggest change, first of all, from years of doing the World Juniors and Olympics and so on and so forth, this is a non-scientific thing, but it's really hard. It's not like, it's no different than football where you have two really good teams and it's hard to beat the same team twice over a short span. And we've seen that in the World Juniors where sometimes these two teams would play, or back in the day, Canada would play Russia in the round robin, and then it's hard to beat them again in the gold medal game. I think that's the case here when you have two incredibly even teams. I also think the Makar-McAvoy switch up from the game last Saturday night, where McAvoy was massive in that game. I'd never seen anybody put Connor McDavid on his ass 3 times in one game. To lose McAvoy and then for Canada to gain Makar, to me, is a substantial shift Canada's way. So, but I mean, look, it's probably going to be a tight game. It's going to come down to a break, or if somebody lets in a bad goal, or it's going to be spectacular. But I think Canada's going to win.
Do you expect the same type of fireworks that we saw on Saturday? Like, that's a big question a lot of people are asking right now.
No, but I didn't expect it on Saturday either. And maybe that was me underestimating the Tkachuks. And I think it made a lot of sense Saturday in a game that wasn't, a Game 7 do or die type of game. And when these two nations hadn't faced each other best on best for so long, and it's just so much tension and the anthems and everything else, it made some sense that was going to happen, especially from a Tkachuk mindset perspective. I don't think it will happen here. I just, first of all, both Tkachuks are banged up. I just think the focus here is going to be winning. Nobody wants to take some early instigator if that happens to be given. I don't think it'll happen, but I've been wrong many a time.
With all that being said, obviously USA hockey's in a good place. Canada's hockey's in a good place. You can make the argument back and forth. Who needs this game more? Do you think it is USA to like put their stamp on that their game has come so far, or is it still Canada's game to, lose here tonight?
I think 100% the Americans. And, maybe look, everyone in Canada is nervous, and it's our game, and it's heightened because of the political situation. But I mean, look, the Americans haven't won one of these since 1996. And I think if Canada loses, well, it's just, there's another chance in the Olympics a year later, which is the same for the Americans. But I just think on home ice, after already beating Canada in really the first tournament ever, I think, between the Canadians and the US, maybe not World Juniors, but at the senior level, where you could argue that the Americans have a slightly deeper roster, I think it's all on the Americans. And like I said, it would be crushing for Canada to lose this, but again, Olympics a year from now, Canada wins again, they can say we always win the ones that matter, right? So yes, we lost a little 4-team tournament that replaced the All-Star game. And by the way, I feel like it's more than that. I'm not trying to diminish it in advance and make Canadian excuses or anything, but I think it's bigger for the Americans for sure.
I love narratives and storylines, and obviously we're a Leafs podcast. Mitch Marner and Austin Matthews, is this a sneaky big game for both these guys, considering what's on the line and also where they're at in Boston at the TD Garden?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it'll end up defining them. That'll be the playoffs in the Leafs uniforms this year. But I think it's a big game for Matthews, who, if you were going to ask me like who my eyes are on this tournament on the American side, I'd say Matthews and Jack Hughes, who've had moments in this tournament, but really haven't done anything defining in it so far. And so I think there's a lot of heat on Austin for that. Mitch, I don't think as much, because he doesn't have to do as much for Canada. Has that big game winner against Sweden in the first game. If Mitch, if he can contribute something, I think that would be critical for where he is at, contract and so on. But I don't think anything that happens to Mitch is going to define his future with the Maple Leafs or anything like that. It's neither one of them. But I feel like it's a bigger game for Austin Matthews just because of his position on that team in comparison to Marner's position on Team Canada.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Something I hadn't heard before. Like, he doesn't have to do as much, Mitch, right? He's, he has McKinnon, he has McDavid. And I think that's a great, and circling back to the Leafs here, obviously having the big three in the tournament, right? William Nylander makes the early exit. Sweden was close, right? Sweden had a few overtime games, or if that goes another way. What do you think of their tournament so far overall? I guess maybe adding Nylander in, and what does that mean for these guys playing this meaningful hockey, using that as a springboard as we look at the last third of the season coming up for the Leafs?
Right. Taking injuries out of the equation, let's hope whatever Matthews has is not something that's going to linger, which I think would be every Leafs fan's fear, right? I still hear, as I'm sure you guys, from multiple buddies saying, why is he playing in this tournament after he missed the last game and was banged up for it? Now, if Austin Matthews was Canadian, I think every Leaf fan would be saying he's got to play in this game, right? It's a different perspective when he's American. So put it this way, I don't think that anything happens is going to have a major impact on what they do for the Leafs down the stretch or in the playoffs. But I would say this, in the case of all three, and it's harder for Nylander now because he's done, I think it can do a lot for your confidence. I think that goal against Sweden probably does a lot for Marner. I think if Austin Matthews scores 2 tonight against Canada and the Americans win, that's a lot that he can carry forward into a playoff series against Florida or Tampa or whatever. So I don't think there's a ton to lose for either one of them, or if you're talking about all three of them in this tournament. I think they've all done, kind of okay. Nylander had the puck a lot for Sweden, had a couple of defensive lapses, same sort of stuff we see, I think, in Toronto. But I think in general, as long as they're healthy, the entire experience of the tournament is a massive plus for all three of them that should help them come playoff time.
I would say,
I don't think the outcome of what happens tonight really impacts that all that much.
Yeah, sorry for interrupting. There's a bit of a delay, but yeah, I would just add too, like there's just forever a civil war in this market regarding all these guys, namely Mitch Marner. And I'll be honest, like I was feeling good about the Maple Leafs going into this tournament, but it has scared me shitless to see these Game 7 type games. And a lot of players have been on the record and saying this is playoff style, it's Game 7 feel. And then I go to watch the game and these guys are nowhere to be found. Do I have a reason to feel that way, do you think?
Yeah, I think that's justified. Although when you are playing a playoff series, let's say an opening round series against whoever it may be, Tampa, Florida, Boston, it's not like this. The intensity is like this, but you are not playing all of the best players in the world. Like that game against the States on Saturday night was so great and so intense and so defensively almost perfect by both teams, with a couple of exceptions, that I didn't come here expecting Mitch Marner to be a dominant player in that game. Austin Matthews may be a slightly different story. So look, I think it's fair for Leaf fans to go, hey, these guys are mega superstars in the league, going to among the highest paid players in the league. Why can't they dominate in a situation like this? I think that's fair, but I don't know that it's realistic. Perhaps I don't know if it's realistic look at McDavid I think you take him out of the equation, right? Basically, because he's on a different planet than everybody else. Besides that, you could go through both of the rosters. Nathan McKinnon didn't have a good game against the Americans really on Saturday night. He wasn't that noticeable. He made some mistakes. Sidney Crosby didn't have a good game against the Americans. And then you go to the other side, and Jack Hughes and Jack Eichel didn't have great games, weren't that noticeable against Canada. So, you know what it's akin to, guys? It's akin to watching your kid play. So, you go watch your kid play hockey and you're focused only on your kid. And so, he or she makes a couple of mistakes and you're like, man, he's having a bad game. And I always used to tell hockey parents, don't watch your own kid, watch somebody else's kid for a couple of shifts, and you'll find that they make the same mistakes. And I think that Leaf fans could be the same way. You're ultra focused on your players, and oh man, Mitch made a bad turnover there, or Austin didn't do something here. But there's just so little room out there when you have these two teams specifically playing against each other, that I think maybe the expectations for Marner or Matthews to dominate are a little out of sync. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't play better. And I think it's a fair expectation for them to do something and play better. I don't know if that's too convoluted to understand, but that's the way I feel.
No, I agree with you too. I think it's a great point too. My son's 7 years old, plays hockey, and I say this the same thing in the NHL with covering the sport now. I feel like you watch a team for so long, you kind of get rose-colored glasses on, where you think everything is great, or at times everything's bad, because you're watching so much of the same players. You think they're better than they are, and I always give Johnny Lazarus a hard time about his New York Rangers, right? Like, he watches them all the time, and how at times I'm like, they're just not as good as you think. But in this tournament, right, I guess, because it's best on best, it changes the whole element of the game. Now, when you look at this game, if we take the goalies out of the equation, right, because we know the story about how Hellebuyck's the best in the world, how Binnington's questionable. Who else, if Canada wins this, who is that difference maker? Is it going to be McDavid, or is it a depth player because of that matchup? Or if they do lose, do you think it falls on Binnington's shoulder, or there's somewhere in between?
I think it could be as simple as that. Binnington's done a lot of really good things in this tournament, but has also let in a shaky goal in every one of the games so far. And if it's a 2-1, 3-2 hockey game, if it's much like the game on Saturday night and there's one iffy goal that goes in, that's going to be a fair criticism, unfortunately, for him. I do think it probably comes down to the McDavid McKinnons for Canada to make a difference in this thing. The American D was so good. Slavin was, I thought, one of the best games I've ever seen the guy play. Again, I don't watch him on a night-to-night basis, but I think if Canada's going to break down that group, that it's probably going to come from one of their top players. And I feel like kind of the bottom six are going to cancel each other out, because they're both really good. They're both effective. It's just like our previous conversation. There's a lot of really good players on either side. So I think it's as simple as the high-end guys. Does Austin Matthews or Jack Eichel do something spectacular for the Americans, or does the McDavid, McKinnon, Crosby? It's the most captain obvious statement, but I think when you get to a big game like this, that's usually what happens. Look at 2010, right? Sidney Crosby scores the goal. He's the difference maker that wins the biggest goal in the history of Canada. If that doesn't happen, who knows what happens? And we're rewriting history. So I do think that it's that simple, the superstars and goaltending sometimes, and special
You
teams.
mentioned, yeah, you're right. And you've mentioned it. You covered a lot of these games, Canada and the US. What's your most memorable game that you've covered?
Well, 2010, I was probably 30 feet behind Crosby. We had this, that was the day of the Olympic consortium between CTV and TSN and Rogers. So the panel, I was the host, and the panel was Nick Kyprios, Bob McKenzie, and Darren Pang. And we had this really cool set that would come out over the Zamboni entrance. It was like some retractable, funky set. And so we would actually sit in the stands, like the row behind the Zamboni entrance during the game with the fans, essentially. And then when the period ended, the set would go, and we do our intermissions right from there. And so I was, just above Ryan Miller when that goal was scored. And so nothing will beat that in my lifetime. I don't think. I can't imagine a scenario bigger than that. And I heard some people saying that this game feels, if not the biggest game since then, maybe even bigger because of the political ramifications. I think we're getting carried away. Like, if you can go back to 2010 and how that felt to have the Olympics in Canada, and as great as tonight's going to be, you can't compare the two things. And I do think that next year, if we get Canada, USA, in a gold medal game, again, it will be elevated an extra degree to what this is tonight. But again, tonight is going to be spectacular.
Couldn't agree more. I guess the best outcome from a Maple Leafs perspective, Matthews hat trick, Marner hat trick. Marner wins it in OT. Appreciate your time. Enjoy the game.
Boys, always great chatting with you. Enjoy it.
Make sure to check out more of our content right here on the Leafs Nation YouTube page. We got long form interviews. We got clips. We got epic rants by Jay Roseau. We simply have it all. And don't forget, you can find out much more at theleafsnation.com. Thanks so much for watching.